Hi, Greg.
Hello, Hugh.
This is December 7th. We're making our full moon video. It's a full moon tonight. Do you know the name of the full moon?
No, I don't.
It's the cold moon because this is when the shortest day of the year and winter starts.
Yeah, because it's getting close to the solstice. Yeah, it
So
makes
this is
sense.
called the cold moon.
hmm
Now,
Okay, no, I didn't know that.
how have you been?
Pretty good here, for the most part. Working all the time
You're
since you're
working.
present.
You're working all the time. What'd you get me?
500 pages.
Oh, all right. Tonight, let's talk about people in my life who murdered my wives.
Yeah,
And
I noticed you wanted to talk about Cook and Perry and Mills and maybe Baker. I'm not sure if I got all the names or.
we can start with Cook. back when back when I was about 17 years old, I was married to Nancy Fredericks from New York. And we had two kids together. We had a daughter and one on the way. And I walked in on her and she was having sex with a police detective, and my daughter was in the wheelchair above her on the kitchen floor. And I didn't divorce her for that. Stayed married to her. Couple of weeks later, my brother Tony come home from leave from Fort Knox. He did 3 tours of duty in Vietnam from Fort Knox, and he was a DIA at Fort Knox, a drill instructor. And he brought his new wife over. Her name was Mrs. Cook, and Mrs. Cook instantly had to go to the store and get some cigarettes. And on the way to the store, she tried to have sex with me 3 hours after she married my brother-in-law. Tried to have oral sex with me, asked me for regular sex on the way to the store. And it left me in an awkward position. But the next day, I told my brother in law, Tony, what she had done. And he annulled the marriage that night. And that was the Cook family in my life. And not long after that, Westhouse, a 55-year-old woman, Westhouse, come into my life. And you got to remember, I was 17, 16 years old, had my first daughter. My daughter was born when I was 15, I believe, 16 maybe. And my wife was 22 at the time, Nancy Fredericks. She had raped me in the back seat of a car in front of her mother's house, and come back to me and asked me for money to get an abortion. And I told her, no, I don't believe in abortion. And I married her. I told her, I'll marry you.
Mhm.
And I think we were married about a week. My daughter was already born, and I walked in on her with a Mr. Akers from Warren Police Department, screwing her on my kitchen floor. I come home from work early. And then Cook come into my life, asking me for sex after marrying my brother-in-law, who essentially ran Fort Knox for 3 tours of duty.
Was her maiden name Cook? Is that
Yeah, that was she was a Cook family. Yeah,
okay? I got you.
and then Westhouse showed up. She was about 55, and I was 15 or 16, and she took her top off and tried to have sex with me. And I didn't know at the time, but Westhouse was Cook's family.
Yeah. Do you know how they're connected exactly?
Yeah, they're cousins,
Okay.
cousins. And the 55-year-old Westhouse woman, her daughter come into my life and started having sex with me. When I decided to divorce Nancy, Nancy had walked up behind me and pushed me down 2 flights of stairs after stabbing me in the back with a butcher knife. At that point, I decided to divorce her. I
I
couldn't
feel
live.
like that's a good reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't live with a woman trying to murder me. I didn't hold it against her, and I never made out a police report because she was a schizophrenic, not taking her medicine,
Yeah.
and she was the first heart transplant on earth. She had a chamber put into her heart in New York in 1949, the day she was born, and she's medical history. When they put that heart chamber, the artificial heart, into her chest when she was a day old, she didn't get enough oxygen, so she was slow.
Hmm.
And then her mother got married so many times, she became a schizophrenic. Her mother was married 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, and I believe she was abused a lot as well.
Yeah, Nancy was abused quite a bit by stepbrothers. Um, and not just by stepbrothers, but by when I had first met her, a biker gang had tied her to a bed and they were gang banging her. And she turned them into the police and put several of the bikers in jail. And that's where the Cook family comes in, because Cook was part of those bikers, the renegades and the outlaws. And that was my next wife's family, Cook and Lawrence and Perry. And they were mad at my first wife because she put some of them in jail for tying her to a bed and pulling a train on her when she was 17 in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And my second wife, her family ran the bikers that Nancy put in jail. So Cook was setting up Nancy before I was even divorced from her, with Westhouse,
Yeah.
her cousins, and Perry. And you'll see even Mills was in on this later. Mills married into my family like Baker did. And people married into my family for money, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
My family gave the world tractors and transmissions for semis and things like that. And that was my mother's family, not my father's. My father's family was dirt poor. My mother's family was rich. People like Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra and Harris and Fuller and the Smithsonian. I grew up working with Putnam, and my family built the Fuller transmissions for semis. When Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, he was my relative. He was married to, his son was married to Harris. I'm Harris. And Westhouse was friends with Whitey, and FBI detained me for Hoffa's murder because that Westhouse woman who was 55 was with Hoffa when he disappeared at the Sly Fox. And then I'd been in his union for one day working for Morrison in Detroit, delivering to clubs in Detroit for the Morrison family. And we had gone on strike and joined Jimmy Hoffa's union. So I was in his union one day and he disappeared. And my new mother-in-law was with them, the 55-year-old woman who had taken her top off and tried to have sex with me in her home on Beebe Street in Warren, Michigan.
Yeah,
And then her
even though you're
daughter,
married to her daughter. That's crazy.
well, I wasn't married to her daughter at that moment.
Oh, okay.
Her daughter come into my life, and when I divorced Nancy and started having sex with me when I was about 17. Her daughter was 12 years older than me. So I had two Westhouse women much older than me having sex with me. And that was because they knew my stepbrother in high school. And my stepbrother was about 12 years older than me. And my stepbrother and Westhouse, they stole my inheritance from me after attempting to murder me. Two of the Westhouse women and their ex-husband attempted to murder me. And at that point, I divorced her. We hadn't been married all that long. But all of this started with Cook coming into my life and marrying my brother-in-law and then trying to have sex with me while I was married to Nancy. And like I say, he got an annulment the next day and went back to Fort Knox. And all of this was done on purpose to get back at Nancy for putting bikers in jail for pulling a train on her in a motel room in Mount Clemens. My second wife always hated Nancy. I didn't know why until years later. I talked to Nancy and she told me about the bikers she put in jail. And the bikers she put in jail would meet on the Westhouse farm where they buried Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
Under my horse in New Haven, Michigan. And the FBI detained me for that murder, but they didn't hold me because I didn't kill him. And I didn't even know that he was my family member back then. I found that out years later, just like I found out that Cook and Westhouse were related and Perry, or they're all related.
Yeah, didn't Hoffa Jr. marry Baker? Did I get that right? Another
He
Baker?
married Mrs. Harris.
Harris, that's right. Yeah, Harris. Thank
And
you.
I'm the Harris. My mother is the Harris family.
Yeah.
So that made Jimmy Hoffa my family member via marriage.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to relate to that. The Westhouse introduced me to Whitey, and Whitey sold me a car. I drove it away from where I bought it, and it broke. The transmission quit working. I had to junk it and buy another car. I went to another dealer and bought another car. Westhouse had introduced me to Whitey, and that's why the FBI detained me. And Westhouse was with Jimmy Hoffa when he disappeared as his guest at the Sly Fox. So they set me up, murdered my own family member, buried him under my horse as they destroyed my marriage to Nancy, because I would have never divorced Nancy because I didn't think her having sex with other men was reason for me to hurt my children. And then Nancy had built this story up because she knew who Cook and Westhouse were. She knew they were the bikers that had tied her up in a motel room, and she automatically figured I was having sex with Cook, and so she stabbed me in the back out of in a fit of rage, jealousy.
When you say stabbed in the back, you mean not literally.
Yeah, all that meant is she really loved me. She didn't want anybody else to have me. And I'm well aware of that at 70. I wasn't aware of that at 17. You learn things as you age. A woman will try to kill a man she loves because she doesn't want another woman to have him. She actually loved me more than any woman I ever knew. And she didn't kill me. I'm still here. And that Cook family and Perry and the bikers that had chained her or tied her up in Mount Clemens motel room and were gangbanging her, they murdered her years later. She was my fourth wife to be murdered. And they cut her leg off and then they murdered her as they let the Bundys out of jail. And there's no record of this because the police helped in all these murders. And all of them were murdered by doctors and hospitals, all four of my wives.
Right.
They would write things like natural causes on dismembered bodies. And there was no reason for the bodies to be dismembered. My wife Victoria, they cut her ears off. I had to bury her without her ears. And they said that a slit throat and missing ears was natural causes because it happened in their hospital while a state policeman from Senator Graham's state watched on. And all of this was planned by the White House and senators because I had stopped their illegal gun and drug trade years earlier. Cook and Perry and Westhouse, they were drug dealers. I kept telling my wife to stop dealing drugs with the bikers. She never did. It's part of the reason I divorced her. The biggest reason I divorced her is she set me up with a guy that gave me 3 pills, and any 2 pills in any combination are deadly. And she and this guy she set me up with gave me all 3 pills, then any 2 of them together are deadly. I ended up in Royal Oak, Beaumont, almost dead, and 2 doctors saved my life, pumped my stomach, and asked me what kind of pills they had given me. And they told me right there that any 2 of those pills would kill me, and anyone who went to med school knew that because it's med school 101.
Was that Dr. Pasternak? Did I remember that correctly?
Dr. Pasternak and Westhouse set me up with him. And he gave me 3 pills and for over a week, and it was killing me. It destroyed my liver and kidneys and gave me muscle spasms. And then I left that situation in Royal Oak Hospital. You know, it didn't dawn on me that Mary set me up with this guy, Pasternak. Because I was too young. I was still 18, 19 years old. And then her father took a shot at me. I went to pick her and my kids up after work one night, and her father come out with a rifle and a night scope and tried to kill me. At that point, I decided to divorce her. Because that's 3 people in her family attempting to murder me. Mm-hmm. After Cook came to me and tried to destroy a guy running Fort Knox, his life, and my wife's life, her brother, mm-hmm. by having sex with me 3 hours after she married him. That whole Westhouse family, they were with Jimmy Hoffa as he disappeared, and the FBI detained me because they set me up to make it look like I buried him in a car. Whitey, their friend Whitey, sold to me. And the FBI, they just hang up on me nowadays because the FBI is run by a family that kidnapped me and murdered my twin when I was 4 on the day Admiral Byrd was murdered. Mm-hmm. And you've written about this in my book, and you know what I'm saying is true. Nobody else has ever heard any of this. Mm-hmm. When my book comes out, everybody will be able to read this truth. And that's not far off, maybe another year. We'll announce it when the book's out. When they murdered Karen, they murdered her Christmas Day. And Karen, when I divorced Westhouse, I moved Karen in as my babysitter to watch after my two kids into a house that I built for Mary Westhouse and bought from her first husband, George. And Mary would go to her mother's and father's and just stay for days at a time for absolutely no reason. We weren't fighting. And I wasn't cheating on her. I loved her. And she was helping me with my kids. But apparently they had this plan to steal my inheritance, which was a sizable amount from my grandfather, Mr. Harris, and his wife, Mrs. Fuller. One of my aunts married one of these bikers. She was about 72 years old, and an 18-year-old biker married her. And when it came time for me to inherit my inheritance, that aunt stole my stock, and her and my brother gave me worthless penny stock and divided my inheritance up between them and other family members. Didn't give me my inheritance. And then my aunt was dead about 4 days later. And an 18-year-old biker from the Renegades ran off with my inheritance. So all of this was planned when Westhouse married me. And her mother was trying to have sex with me at the same time she was having sex with me. And they were both older than me. I wasn't even 18 yet when all of this started. I was about 16 when Cook entered my life, and all these women were in the same family, related. Cook, Westhouse, Perry.
Do you know how Perry was related to Westhouse? Were they
Another
cousins,
cousin.
in-laws?
They're all cousins.
Mhm.
Yeah. And when Westhouse died, that's when I learned of all of this. She died about 8 years ago, and I read the tombstone. It's in my family's cemetery, and she's not my family. But she claims she's my children's grandmother, and she's not. She's no relation to them. Neither is Cook or Perry. I'm not the Cook or the Perry family.
Where did she get the money for that giant memorial of hers that she has there?
Probably for murdering Jimmy Hoffa, I would imagine.
Wow.
Somebody, or maybe from my inheritance. I don't know. You remember the biker ran off with my inheritance, and it was quite a bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt had just bought a brand new home in New Baltimore, Michigan, up that way. And as soon as they moved in, she was dead, and the biker ran off with my money and sold the house. And my stepbrother ran off with the rest and divided more of it up to my entire family. And then they gave me penny stock, which was worthless. It was worth nothing.
Yeah,
And
you still have it.
I was the original stockholder, and they forged my name on the stock and took my inheritance.
It's unreal.
And I say forged my name because they had me sign it, but under false pretenses,
Right.
and didn't return to me with my inheritance.
You were still a teenager then anyway, I think, weren't you?
I was young.
Yeah. Or just barely out of it.
I was in my 30s, I believe.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay. For some reason I pictured that event sooner, but okay.
Jimmy Hoffa was murdered when I was about 23. And that was the Westhouse family that did that. They set all of that up. The 55-year-old woman, her former husband, was a state policeman who lost his job because he murdered a guy. And that's the same guy that took a shot at me with a rifle and a night scope when I stopped by to pick up his daughter, my wife, and our kids. And her and I didn't have any kids together, and she never adopted mine. So for her and her mother and Cook and Perry to pretend like they're the family of my children, it's just a lie. All that family did was murder my family members, 4 wives, Jimmy Hoffa, via the bikers and state policemen. And Elbrooks Patterson and state policeman Westhouse and a state policeman who murdered Victoria in Tennessee, they're all related. And crime by retired state policemen. Elbrooks Patterson hid the murder of my twin and my kidnap with my twin as they brought Sirhan's child from California with my kidnapped twin. And that was in 1957, 11 years before they framed Sirhan for murdering Bobby Kennedy. And then I'm the Baker family that Judith Baker married into. And all of this is crime in my life.
That's why they're
hiding the murders of the Oakland County child killings. And those killings were performed by governors. Governor Osbourne's family, Governor Long's family, Governor Wallace's family, Darrell Hall and others murdered those kids in Oakland County all the way back to 57. They started with my twin.
They're still attacking the Baker family today. That's in the news today. Elon Musk has fired Baker today.
Elon Musk is
FBI guy.
Elon Musk is not an American.
Right.
And Elon Musk has been attacking all of America. He attacked NASA. He attacked our car companies. And everybody thinks he created the electric car, and he didn't.
Not even close, right?
Ford DeLorean had electric cars before Elon was born.
Right.
And I grew up with my Uncle Tony ran Henry Ford's mansion and married Susan King, I believe, way back in the 20s, 1910. My family ran Henry Ford's mansion in Dearborn, Michigan. I grew up with John DeLorean. He was my friend. He'd drive past me every day in an electric car and wave, all the way back to 1950s. And that's because my family's homestead is Centerline Tank Arsenal, the Abrams Tank Plant, and the General Motors Tech Center across the street. That was my family's homestead. My father and his brothers used to go out and fight with the Rinke brothers because they stole all their family's property for $35 as his he had 17 brothers and sisters fighting in a world war, and the government instituted taxes and took his parents' land away from them. And the Rinke brothers were behind that. Rinke Chevrolet in Warren, Michigan. They took up all of my family's farm, their homestead. It was 200 acres of Detroit and Warren and Centerline. It included Qualman Eggs on 10 Mile. It went past 8 Mile and all the way up into Centerline. That was my family's farm. And they took it away from them for $35 as my father's entire family fought and died in a world war.
Wow.
And the Rinke brothers did that. My father and his brothers got back from the World War, and every week they fought with the Rinke brothers who had stolen their parents' farm, their homestead. That's a long time ago. It was before I was born. My father and all his brothers told me who the Rinke brothers were.
Wow.
They bought up the land after the federal government instituted taxes. Well, the families were over fighting a world war. The Rinke brothers were in America, draft dodgers, buying up all the land from the people who homesteaded it. That's a crime in itself.
Yeah.
And I grew up knowing Hamilton Chevrolet and DeLorean and John Shikes. I designed robots that built the cars for Ford's Chevrolet and Chrysler. That's what I did for a living. And then Nancy Fredericks, my wife, my first wife, who they cut her leg off and then murdered her as they let the Bundys out of jail. And there's a whole story behind that. The same FBI that named the guy who kidnapped and raped my daughter at 7, that same FBI named Dan Cooper and Ted Bundy. And there's a whole story behind this that's real history. From the FBI that kidnapped me and murdered my twin when we were 4, chained next to me in Governor Osbourne's basement. And all of this is truth, but the world's never heard it because it's never been reported because of Senator Graham owning the media in Detroit.
Yeah, that's huge.
Here's a little tidbit for you. You know who Linda Lovelace was?
Yes.
Deep Throat?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Epstein made the Deep Throat movie.
Yeah, that's I think you put
Not
that in the book.
Epstein, not the Epstein that died in jail, but another Epstein.
Yeah.
That whole Epstein family who are friends with Clinton and Trump, who hide the murder of my wives with people like Garland and Barr. I grew up with Garland and Barr. And Senator Graham owns the media in Detroit, who employs Osbourne, where my twin was beat to death in the basement with Osbourne, Darrell Hall, Wallace and Long, and Anderson and Andrews. These were governors.
That Epstein renounced.
I was handed to them with my twin out of my kindergarten class in a public school on Hoover Street. And
Yeah.
Hoover ran the FBI at this time. And they had just finished construction of the Hoover Dam, I believe. And all of this is related to my life.
Right.
Hubert Hoover was president. And they murdered my twin as they tortured me and had sex with me at 4. Governors. And none of this is in the news because Oakland County and Macomb County police departments, Macomb County was screwing my wife a week after I married her, and Oakland County hid my kidnap and the murder of my twin. That was Al Brooks Patterson. And Senator Graham owned the media, the news, the biggest radio station, the biggest news, TV news station, and no mention of my kidnap or my twin's murder. Nowhere, nowhere for 70 years now. And the Graham family did that. And you know this is truth, Greg. So all of that in my life, it comes to a head with that cook woman coming into my home after marrying my brother, who ran Fort Knox, and trying to have sex with me 3 hours after she married him.
You mentioned that you wanted to bring Mills
deliberately
into
asked me to drive her to a store so she could have oral sex with me on the way.
Yeah.
And then she pulled down her pants and wanted me to have sex with her. I told her no.
Right. You mentioned you wanted to bring Mills into it, Hugh, at the beginning.
Well, Mills comes along later after they murdered Karen in 91 on Christmas Day. Well, no, just before then. I went to a publisher. I was a publisher at ASCAP, New York, via Foley Federal Court. And Mills and Elvis Presley's publisher, B.B. Bourne, we went to dinner together, and BB and Mr. Mills offered me a music contract not to become a publisher. And this was about 1983. They offered me a lot of money to just produce music for them
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
not
huge
become
contract.
a publisher. And this was prior to 9/11. And I refused them. I said, no, you should have gave me a music contract back when I was 16 or even 12. And my family wrote the music Elvis Presley was singing in his movies all the way back in the 50s. And they completely pretended like I didn't exist, and I own Bottom Line. The band and we had performed for almost 30 years by 1983. In the biggest clubs in Detroit and Chicago and Canada. And we performed at the Great Lakes Naval Base for the veterans returning. They would never give me a music contract until I became a publisher. Then they offered me a music contract not to become a publisher. You there, Greg? Greg Bowe? I think I lost Greg here. I'll give him a call. We lost our connection here somehow.
I lost connection apparently.
Yeah, I know. Could you still have your internet?
No. It happens 50 times a day down here. We just got T-Mobile thinking it would be better than the other one, but this one's worse than the last one. It just constantly loses connection.
Okay. Well, this is still recording, so I'm going to end this video here, and you can get back to me when you got internet, and we'll finish it, because there's a whole heck of a lot more.
Okay.
Try to get your connection back. Call your provider, and I'm going to end this video here.
Well, it's back now, but you have to.
Well, rejoin me then. Click the link and rejoin me.
Yeah, I'm doing it. You'll just have to edit it.
I won't even edit it. We'll leave this in. It's only been a couple of minutes.
Okay. Well, whatever you want to do there. Let's see, join the video. So.
Okay, and I'm admitting you now.
Okay.
And there, I've got you back.
Looks like I'm back.
So I'll hang up on the phone call. Welcome back, Greg.
Hello.
I lost you there for about 2 minutes.
Yeah, internet connections. Unfortunate.
So where did you lose me? We were talking about Mills giving me a music contract not to be a publisher with Elvis Presley's publisher, Bourne. Did you catch that part?
Okay, yeah, I broke up again. My connection is unstable, it's telling me. You were talking about Mills and Bourne when I lost you.
No, Mills and Bourne at an ASCAP BMI meeting in New York. We had dinner together, and Mills offered me a music contract, a very sizable music contract, not to be a publisher. And I was already a publisher. I refused his offer. And then the world got 9/11 because they were using my name, my likeness, and all my work for the 50 years prior to 9/11. and I wouldn't give up my federal publishing license. I could have took Mills and Bourne to court for stealing my name and trademark Bottom Line. And I didn't, because I was murdered over and over again. Right up and after 9/11, I've been murdered dozens of times. And I always recover from the murder, the hit. And that'll be in your book.
Oh yeah, we got a chapter on those.
But Mills, the very person that offered me a music contract not to be a publisher because they were using my trademark and my first and last names in their music, with Huey Lewis and the News and Billy Squire from France and Germany. And then Bottom Line was being used by DuPont and 2,500 corporations they owned and ran. That's why they wanted me to take a music contract and not be a federal publisher, because they've been using me my whole life through, ever since they murdered Admiral Byrd and kidnapped me with my twin and the Sirhan kid back in 1957. They've been using me. And then my family wrote the songs that Elvis sang, songs like Devil with a Blue Dress On, Good Golly, Miss Molly. I grew up playing drums in Troy, Michigan with Mitch Ryder and Detroit Wills. My brother married into Mitch Ryder and Detroit Wills, my brother Michael.
Yeah.
So there's a long history of this music, and Bourne Publishing, which was Elvis Presley's publisher, and Mills, who married into my family back before I was born. Mills married into my family. Just like Westhouse did. And then they claim that they're my kids' relatives, and they're not. They're no relation to my children. And this is a cover-up of Washington and all the senators whose illegal gun and drug trade I stopped, and the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. They want to appear in the historic record like they're my children's parents, and they're not.
That's why they're trying to replace Baker with homosexuals all the time. They're trying to make Baker look like he's part of Hoover and the other homosexuals in the FBI, I think. And that's
my Uncle Baker wasn't a homosexual. There was nobody in my
exactly.
family who was a homosexual.
Right.
We were kidnapped by homosexual governors.
Exactly.
In 57. Back then, if you admitted you were a homosexual, men would beat you to death on the street. And there's no lie in that.
Right. So now they've taken that and they've tried to turn Baker into a homosexual and having Baker make the gay flag, and
yeah, and that's the people that married into my family.
Exactly.
It's not my family. My family gave you 3 Bibles. We gave you the King James Bible. King James is my cousin. Schofield is my cousin. He gave you the Living Bible. And Smith is my cousin. He gave you the Mormon Bible.
Yeah.
And there were no gays in my family, and we didn't believe in gay marriage.
Right.
In all of our Bibles, we tell you flat out, God said homosexuality is an abomination. It's right there in the Bible. And my family were Christians.
Yeah.
I no longer pretend to be a Christian because the communist Pope even took my middle name when they stole my trademark and gave you Huey Lewis and Billy Squire via Cook, Perry, and Mills and the Bourne Publishing Company. And the Bourne Publishing Company was owned by the Queen of England. And there's no lie in this. The Queen of England wrote all your college books and history books in high school.
And that's why Mills is affiliated with colleges. I get it.
Right. Exactly. And they married into my family. They're not my family.
Right.
My family gave you the King James Bible. So Mills, after I refused to take his music contract, which would have been millions of dollars, and told him, no, I'm going to stay a publisher. Then he put George Bush and filmed him on 9/11. That was Mills
Right.
married into my family filming George Bush on 9/11. As the first plane hit the first tower, George Bush said, Hughes structures are collapsing. He said my name.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And he was talking about my publishing license they stole. And my name they stole. And my trademark they stole. It was
Oh,
$3 trillion. It was
think about this, you.
It was $3 trillion of theft.
Mm-hmm.
28,000 worldwide entertainment contracts with people like Kenny Rogers and Burt Reynolds, Ted Nugent, Twisted Sister. They stole all of these from me.
Yeah, yeah. This ties into 9/11 very conspicuously. And I was watching a movie made by British people on Prime called Man in the High Tower. And you think, well, Tower in the Twin Towers. And the hero on this, they turned Mills, instead of being the propagandist like he is, or like the Mills that we're talking about here.
No, they put them in movies, and the drug dealers and the murderers are the heroes.
Yes, and here Mills is the propagandist defeating the Nazis in that movie.
I stopped an illegal gun and drug trade run by the Senate in 79, 80, and 81 on property I bought from Donald Trump's tax attorney, Mazar, in Utica, Michigan. It was a gun and drug trade. They would, when the Mexican cartels didn't have enough money to pay the senators money, they would give them drugs. And then they were laundering the drugs on the property I bought. It was a 7-square-mile farm in Utica, Michigan. And everybody that worked, that lived in the houses at the back of my property, they were worker houses and rented by families. Hill rented one. Blanchard rented one. Henry, a guy who called himself Henry Bouguet, who was a pharmacist in Utica, Michigan, was one. Bucky Larson rented a house there. A guy by the name of Danielson, Nagy, and all of these people were laundering the CIA drugs. The senators were selling illegal guns to Mexican cartels with.
Yeah. And
they were all living on my property. In worker homes they rented via Donald Trump's tax attorney, Mazar. And there's no lie.
Was that first name? Was that Hill, Hill?
Yeah, that was the last name of that family, Hill, and that's the Kennedy family.
Very interesting.
Kennedy, Blanchard was governor of Michigan. And all these families rented these homes from Donald Trump's tax attorney, Mazar. And all of them were put in movies, and I was put in jail for a year. My daughter was kidnapped off her bus at 7 with the Hill family who kidnapped her. And then the Hill family told the police, oh, she wasn't kidnapped. She walked down there. She walked 5 miles down the road.
Yeah.
It got put in a Caterpillar, locked in a Caterpillar in an excavation yard right after Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. She was 7 years old. And in 5 minutes, she walked all the way down to an excavation company and got herself locked into a Caterpillar. They were going to bury her after raping her. You understand this?
I do.
And it was the Hill family. And they were drug dealers living on the property I stopped the CIA illegal gun and drug trade on.
Well, I can see why.
Which led to Noriega being asking for sanctuary with the communist Pope. And my family put the Pope on their magazine, Harris Publishing magazines, Life, Look.
Yeah.
Harris Publishing owned 264 worldwide magazines back then.
Yeah, yeah.
Bill Gates is my cousin.
Well, I can see why Hill and Mills would really work together.
My first wife's father, who they cut her leg off and then murdered her when they let the Bundys out of jail under Trump. Her father was Joe Jacobs of IBM. Joe Jacobs of IBM gave my cousin Gates the software to make his first computer. No
Yeah.
lie in this. 1965.
Yeah.
I don't exist. I'm not newsworthy. And 4 of my wives have been murdered by bikers and state policemen and senators and CBS News. And you know all of this is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have the documents to prove it, but the police, they leave the murders up to God. That's if I go to visit the police station, oh, we're going to leave these murders up to God. That's what they tell me. And that's illegal. So anybody in the country gets murdered, they make out a murder report. If it's Hugh Squire's wife, we leave it up to God.
Right. Right.
Understand this?
With the CBS story, they're copying you now with that Hunter Biden laptop, and the guy who supposedly got Hunter Biden's laptop is like a mirror image story of what happened to you. Except,
Tom Garrett had sent me FBI computers from Clinton's White House. That's correct.
right, right. So
Yeah.
they're trying to make it look like this guy's real instead of your story.
Yeah, another Democrat. But the Democrat, all 3 parties are criminals and in on my kidnap and the murder of my twin all the way back in 57. Paul's family is Ron Paul and Rand Paul, and he was my business manager at Bottom Line New York and Bottom Line in Michigan and in 264 countries. He sold me out to the Russian mafia, the Paul family. Then you had Trump borrowing money from my family's banks, Harris Banks, Mellon Banks, Morgan Banks, Chase Banks. These are my family members. These are my cousins, not Cook and Perry. Mills married into my family before I was born. Not my family. He's not my blood. But they pretend they're my children's parents.
Right.
To this day, in my family's cemetery, they put down that they're the grandmother, they're the mother. And these gravestones are in my family's cemetery right now, and they're no relation at all to my children. My child, her mother was born in New York, Nancy Fredericks, and her father was Joe Jacobs of IBM.
Yeah.
Her family was not Cook or Perry or Westhouse. And I divorced the Westhouse family because they tried to murder me 3 times after murdering Jimmy Hoffa. And these are the people that hid my kidnap with Graham and the murder of my twin and the murders of the Oakland County child killings. They murdered Timmy King. That was President Ford's family. President Ford's real name was King and Gardner, and you know this. His name was never Ford.
Moore tried to kill him. Yeah.
And you know, I went to school with Oscar Tyler Moore. That's Mary Tyler Moore's family. And Mary Westhouse was selling drugs with Oscar Tyler Moore. I kept asking her to stop. She never did.
Right.
Instead of stopping, her and her family kept trying to murder me.
And that's why they killed his girlfriend at the same time that they murdered.
They were making money off of drugs,
Victoria.
illegal guns. They were making money off of drugs, illegal guns. They murdered Jimmy Hoffa, and they got paid for doing that. And then they stole my inheritance for the Fuller transmission and the Harris steam thrashers. Massey Ferguson, that was my inheritance.
Now, didn't they throw Oscar Tyler Moore's girlfriend into the dumpster near Graceland or on the Graceland property?
In Memphis on the same day my wife Victoria was murdered.
Yeah.
And I and Oscar Tyler Moore went to school together. We were 700 miles apart in Tennessee. He was in Memphis. I was by Virginia, Bristol, Virginia, in Bulls Gap and Mossheim. They murdered Victoria and they murdered Oscar Tyler's girlfriend on the same day. They threw his girlfriend in a dumpster, and he was still selling drugs.
Yeah.
The day I held 3 police departments off at my front door in Mary Westhouse apartment, I was holding the very gun that killed Kennedy. I had SWAT teams surround my house, and I held them off for a week by myself at 17 with one rifle.
And they wouldn't storm the house
No,
because they didn't
and
want
I
that
ended
gun in
up
an
with custody.
investigation.
I ended up with custody of my kids. But at the same time they did that, right down the street, the guy Mary Westhouse and her first husband were dealing drugs with, Oscar Tyler Moore. He was SWAT teamed, and they even put a shotgun down his little sister's throats when they were 3 and 4 years old.
Yeah, yeah, but they wouldn't do that to you because of that
Threw him
gun.
in jail for drugs.
Mhm.
No, they wouldn't do that to me because I was holding the real gun that killed John F. Kennedy.
And that would open up a big can of worms for him.
Right. And then it would have went back to the Oakland County child killings and my twin being murdered in Osbourne's basement, and Osbourne was governor of Michigan.
Right.
That's exactly correct, Greg. And Mills and the drugs I stopped in Utica, Michigan happened 2 years after I divorced the Westhouse family and held off 3 police stations with one rifle that really killed Kennedy. And she got the rifle from her father, who was a state policeman. The same state policeman that took a shot at me when I went to pick her and my kids up, and we weren't fighting. We had no fight. He had a fight with me because he set Pasternak up with her to murder me, and I didn't die. So then he tried to kill me with a rifle.
Wow.
You understand this picture?
Mm-hmm.
And then Perry comes in when they murdered Terry Heath and Victoria Mellon. Terry Heath created the Head Start program. She was Ronald Reagan's role model for the Head Start program in California back in the 60s, 70s. She ran a Head Start CPS office in Wisconsin. 2 off-duty policemen kidnapped her. She called me on the phone. She says, "Hugh, you're the only guy I trust. I escaped 2 policemen who kidnapped me." Sorry, I dropped my mic. Terry Heath called me on the phone 5 states away from Wisconsin after they kidnapped her out of her office. She said, "Help me." That afternoon, an Italian kid come to me and sold me a Civil War ranch owned by the Manning family at a price I couldn't refuse. And I hadn't even been started looking for a house yet. He just showed up on the street, and I said, "Hi." And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for a house." And he said, "I know where you can get one." He put me on a Manning Civil War ranch in Mossheim, Tennessee. And they put me there for a reason. That's where they murdered Terry Heath after she escaped the 2 off-duty policemen. And she was protecting little kids in Wisconsin on the Great Lakes where I lived. And these same governors and gay people were still flying little boys and girls off the Great Lakes in seaplanes out to California and selling us for sex. As Epstein and Trump and Clinton were having sex with underage kids in New York. And my girlfriend back then was Mary Pat Cotter. And Epstein became famous on the Welcome Back Cotter show. And all this is interrelated. And this is as Trump was stealing $5 billion at a time from my family's banks by overrating his properties and then never paying a penny back and filing bankruptcy.
I get it. Another interesting thing that I found here recently was about how they, I mean, I've already known that they marked you in a million different movies, but I found one movie that marked it so closely, marked your life so closely that it just floored me. And that was Friday the 13th Part 2, where at the beginning of the movie you have 2 characters named Terry and Vicky sitting together.
Well, Vicky's
And
kids are Michael and Freddie, and you got Michael Myers and Freddie Krueger. That's not coincidence.
right.
Not coincidence.
And then
her first husband was a drug dealer I stopped when I stopped the drugs in Utica, there was a drug dealer working with the police all the way up in by Harrisville. Police were and Victoria's first husband were selling the drugs coming in on my farm, and the FBI caught him and put them both in prison.
Well,
He
get
died.
get this.
He died leaving prison. So did the sheriff.
Okay, we'll get this
This is
part.
back in the 80s. Her
Yeah,
kids
yeah.
were Freddie and Michael. And
Well,
I
this
told you, all
yeah.
the drug dealers, they make movies. They make them into heroes in movies.
Yeah, they can't. This movie came out in 1981, so that makes sense. And in the movie, Terry had a little dog, and right after Terry's boyfriend was killed by Jason while he was hanging from a tree, the dog comes up to Jason, and then at the end, the dog had lived.
No,
And
my brother Michael's son is Jason. Then my aunt who stole my inheritance is Annabelle. You got the Annabelle doll. My
Right.
little sister married Baldwin's boss at his job, Chucky. You got Chucky the doll, and all of this is Hollywood marking my family as they stole my inheritance, and my publishing license, and my trademark, and my name, and even
right.
the
Well,
Pope,
yeah.
even the Pope in the Vatican is in on this theft that caused 9/11.
Yes.
And then they
Well,
murdered
your family goes back
the
to Poe's
Christians who
literary
did,
critics.
the Christians who did this from Israel and the Bush family and Cheney in France and Germany and London. There's a Bottom Line bar in London. That's my stolen trademark. There's a Bottom Line bar in New York. That's my stolen trademark. There's a Bottom Line bar in Vietnam. That's my stolen trademark. And I was a publisher in all those countries. And they stole my trademark in every country I was a publisher in. Mills and Bourne did this.
There's
Elvis
your Bourne
Presley,
conspiracy.
publisher, and yeah. And then you have the Bourne supremacy. These movies all mark my life as they stole my life. And then they had to blow up the theft in the Twin Towers. They blew up my civil rights case in the Pentagon against the Groves family who built the Pentagon. You understand all of this? And
perfectly.
They appointed a girl who wasn't even an attorney to represent me when they stole my trademark. She hadn't even passed the bar exam. She was still going to school, studying to become a lawyer, and they wouldn't let me call my lawyer. They appointed me a lawyer, and then they put me in jail again.
Right.
As they stole my life and my inheritance. And Perry and Cook and Mills did this. And then at the same time, Westhouse dies, who's their cousin, and she claims that her and Cook and Perry are my daughter and my son's parents, and they're not.
Right.
No relation at all. And it's right there in my family's cemetery, the biggest gravestone in my family's cemetery. And this girl, she had no money. The Westhouse woman who was 55 when I was 17 took her top off and tried to have sex with me. She had no money. And she's got the biggest gravestone in New Haven, Michigan. It's not even possible, Greg.
Right. Right.
She became my mother-in-law. She had no money. She died of heart problems.
Yeah.
She had congestive heart failure, I would think, because she had that. She was on nitro when she stripped and tried to have sex with me. She was on nitro with congestive heart failure. And then her daughter married me. And it was all about helping me with my kids. And my kids didn't need any help. They hated Nancy because they put their biker friends in jail for pulling a train on her in Mount Clemens, Michigan. That's what it was all about. And then at the same time, they set my aunt up with an 18-year-old biker to steal my inheritance. And Mary Westhouse, my wife, went to school with my stepbrother who He put all that together with the bikers and Perry and Cook and Mills.
Yeah.
That was my mother's first husband. Wasn't my father. They didn't like the fact that my mother divorced her first husband, so they attacked me and my father. And they stole my inheritance. That inheritance was left to me, not to my stepbrother,
Yeah.
by my mother's father. And they just they took it upon themselves to steal my inheritance using the bikers that killed Hoffa with state policemen and murdered 4 of my wives. And this is exactly what's going on right now today. And Graham hides it all in Detroit media. And he pretends like he doesn't. Roseanne Barr and Kathy O'Brien, they grew up next door to me.
Mm-hmm.
The Lioness. Garland grew up with me. Trump gave you Barr because he already know Barr hides me with Osbourne and Graham. And CBS News destroyed my income as they murdered 2 of my wives on the Civil War ranch the Italian guy gave me for next to nothing.
Right. That's why we had Judy Garland and Wizard of Oz, like Osbourne.
Right. Yeah. And they've been
Garland.
marketing me like this for over 70 years.
And then
All
Joe
the way back to when Clara Harris, my family member, was with Lincoln and they murdered Lincoln.
Yes. And
This
Biden
has
appoints Barr. Or I mean
been going on.
Garland.
And it's the Cook and the Perry and the Mills family doing it.
Yes. Yeah.
They're
real
lying
obvious.
about who their family is, lying about who did what in history books with the Queen of England, Bourne Publishing and Mills. And then they don't want me to be a publisher because, gee, look what I'm telling you. I'm telling you the truth. And they're hiding the truth from all of America. And why don't any of them sue me? I name names.
Same reason they wouldn't come
They
and take the
can't
gun.
sue me because everything I'm saying is truth.
Yeah.
And I'll
Same
prove
reason
it.
they can't take the gun. Yeah. That'll open up a big can of worms.
I'll prove it in a courtroom. Every lawyer in this country studied out of my stolen trademark because of Cook, Perry, and Mills. Bottom line.
Right.
And Westhouse. They murdered Jimmy Hoffa. And then every lawyer for the past 55 years has studied out of my stolen trademark to pass the bar exam. And all those attorneys are now Supreme Court justices and circuit court judges. Lawyers become judges. And every judge and every lawyer in the country studied out of my stolen name and trademark. Since 1965, when I married Nancy Fredericks and Joe Jacobs gave Bill Gates the software. And then Cook and Perry run Apple. And Cook and Westhouse and Perry, they married me to spy on my life. At the same time, they stole my inheritance. Everything I designed for the auto companies, Westhouse, the 55-year-old woman who's Perry and Cook's cousin, who took her top off and tried to have sex with me on BB Street. She would steal everything I designed for the auto companies and give it to Apple. And Apple Computer didn't exist back then. You had Steve Jobs, just like Gates, making a computer in his garage. And my family designed the computers and handed it to Gates. Then Cook and Perry and Westhouse jumped into my life because they hated Nancy, whom they chained to a bed and pulled a train on, and she put them in jail. And then they were stealing everything I designed for General Motors, Chrysler, Ford. You got this picture? And it's true. Yeah. It's truth. And that's why nobody sues me. And that's why I can say Governor Osborne's family chained me to a toilet, tortured me, stuck their dicks down my throat, and murdered my twin. And they don't sue me because it's truth.
Yeah.
Even Patterson, L. Brooks Patterson covered it all up. He was sitting in a police car out in front of Osbourne's house as I was being tortured, and he knew it. Do you understand?
Daryl Hall's still alive, and he doesn't come after you either.
No, none of them ever will. And they all know I'm saying truth. Osbourne's still alive. L. Brooks Patterson, I sat in his office. You know what they did when I sat in his office?
Yeah, I know.
They murdered 5 of my family's kids, 2 in Illinois, or Indiana, I'm sorry. I found 2 more in Indiana, Greg.
I didn't know about those, but okay.
It's posted. I
Okay.
posted it about a month ago when I read the story. They killed my brother who Cook married. They killed his
Yeah.
son, Tony Jr. They
Yeah, I
killed
know
my
that one.
bass player's son, Tony Jr. And they
And
killed
that one.
Karen Kissel and my kid, Serena.
Yeah. Mhm.
As I sat in Al Brooks Patterson's office and told him the truth about Osbourne, they murdered 5 kids in my family. And nobody went to jail. Just like 4 wives, nobody went to jail. They murdered my entire mother's family, leaving church in semis. And then the ones they missed, they went back and ran them over in their driveways and on Clinton River Road. Nobody went to jail. And that was before I was born. That's when my
Yeah.
mother was 7. And they've been doing this all the way back to when they murdered Lincoln. And Albert Pike was my relative. They murdered Albert Pike so they can sit there and tell you who's head of the Masons. Right there
Makes
where you
sense.
live, Greg. That's why they murdered him. And he's my family member. And that's when this cover-up started, when they murdered Albert Pike. And I live here with the Pike kids. They're doctors. Both his daughters, his great-great-granddaughters, they're doctors. Dr. Pike. No lying this. Star Trek. Harv Bennett was my mother's friend. He gave you Star Trek. Hugh of Borg. My family owned Borg Warner. Fuller Transmissions owned Borg Warner. I'm Hugh of Borg.
We have Pike streets around here that I suspect is probably named after that family too.
The very first captain on the Enterprise was Christopher Pike. My family.
Right.
My family.
Oh yeah, Star Trek marks you like there's no tomorrow.
Where was I 7 years before they released COVID? And I told everybody in a video they're creating a virus to give to you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. You told me before it ever come
Where
out.
was I? I was in King County. I'm the King family in Kirkland.
Mm-hmm.
Well, gee, who took Christopher's Pike place on the Enterprise?
Yeah,
Captain
Kirk, yeah.
Captain Kirk.
And on every episode of Voyager, they put your number 47 in there.
Correct.
They either display it or say it. Every single episode.
I'm Admiral Byrd's nephew. 7 is the Navy. I was kidnapped at 4.
Yeah. Well, on your birthday, 4th of July.
Mm-hmm. 7-4. I'm marked in so many ways in every movie on Earth, Greg. It's pathetic and nobody knows it. And everybody thinks I'm lying to them. I'm not.
Yeah, well,
my family gave you 3 Bibles, King James, Schofield Bible, Mormon Bible. And we created America.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then the people that killed Albert Pike and Lincoln are hiding me my whole life through. Senator Graham, Trump, the Clintons. You're starting to get this picture, Greg? And then they murder my wives, Terry Heath, who was Reagan's role model at Head Start because she created the program.
Yeah. Well, that movie Friday the 13th Part 2 really, I mean, that they put it where it's so obvious. I mean, Terry had a dog, and your Terry had a dog. The dog lived. She was murdered right after her boyfriend was hanging.
There's a new movie out you can Google, Greg. It's
Oh,
Who-
hang on. Let me tell you rest first, because I don't think
called
everybody
Who
knows it.
Killed Nancy?
Yeah.
My last wife to be murdered, Nancy.
Yes. 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 And you got Christmas Karen out there now.
Mhm.
But in that movie, Victoria, your Victoria was in a wheelchair, but in Friday the 13th, uh, the guy, her boyfriend, Vicky's boyfriend, is murdered as he's sitting in a wheelchair calling Vicky's name.
Yeah, but Vicky wasn't in a wheelchair back then.
Right. So how did they even know? How did
She
they
was
make
still
that happen?
walking, and women usually don't get muscular dystrophy. She had a form of muscular dystrophy that women get too, but it didn't show up until later in her life when she was about 40.
Yeah.
When that
So
movie was
wow,
made, she was in her 20s,
wow,
and she had just had Michael and Freddie.
that's
You
just
got the
unreal.
picture?
Yeah, yeah.
I've been watching this all my life, Greg, and
Nancy lost her leg, and he had the
it's
leg layup
because my
movie.
family made the first TV series on earth called Make Room for Daddy. Everybody attacked me the day I was born because they all wanted to be on TV, and that includes Senator Graham's family. Your Baptist church, who was that Graham there in the Baptist church? Billy
Uh,
Graham
yeah, Billy Graham. Yeah.
attacked me. No lying this, Greg. And then Christians blew up the towers. London, Israel, Germany, and France blew up the Twin Towers with Americans who stole my
Yeah.
trademark and my civil rights case. The Pope stole my name. The Pope's Christian. And then they told you Muslims did it and had you murder 20 million Muslims. And this is what's really going on in this country right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was raised to be a priest, and I owned a ministry right in the Bible Belt. And who did I own the ministry with, Greg?
Cook.
Yeah, there's the Cook family again. Instead of coming to have sex with me after marrying my brother-in-law,
Mhm.
3 hours after she married him, she wanted sex with me. They make me a partner at a ministry in the Smoky Mountains next to Dolly Parton. It's where I live, next to Dolly Parton's family. And my wife, Terry, was murdered. Karen was murdered. Victoria was murdered. Within a span, every 7 years, they murdered Karen in 91. They murdered Terry in 2002. They murdered Victoria in 2011. About every 7 years, they murdered my wife on a holiday. Victoria was murdered on Halloween Eve. Ears missing, throat slit. They called it natural causes. 9 Americans murdered her. 9. Terry was murdered by 2 people, policemen, hung in her dog's leash on my birthday, July 4th. Karen
Yeah.
was murdered.
Just like the movie. It's unreal.
Karen was murdered Christmas Day, just like the movie.
Yeah. Christmas Karen.
And then when they murdered Victoria, you had V on the TV. Remember the series V, the Alien movie?
Yes.
They always hide me behind S4 and Area 51. And I make videos and I say my family built Area 51 and S4, and they're hiding the truth of Kennedy's murder there. And now the CIA comes out and after 70 years, or since 1945, they denied there were any aliens at S4. Now the CIA is coming out and telling you, oh, there's aliens there. It's really truth. After I made a video and said they were hiding my truth of Kennedy there.
Right. Mhm.
It's like a joke.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
all being instigated by Cook, Perry, and Mills and Baker. This
Well,
is
it's
a,
been about an hour and 10 minutes if you want to stop it there.
I want to go farther. When they murdered Victoria, Cook gave me a job, made me a 50% partner at Smoky Mountain Ministries. I would hand him $6,000 a week.
Yeah.
Half of that money was mine. He never gave me a paycheck for over a year and a half. I had to go get a second job to live. I didn't stop working with Cook, but
Right.
they murdered my attorney as on the same day they murdered my wife. They called my wife's missing ears and slit throat natural causes, murdered my attorney on his way to file charges with the DA
Mhm.
in Johnson City, Tennessee. Cook gives me a job as his partner, never gives me a paycheck to prevent me from hiring another attorney.
Right. Right.
And this is that's the Cook family again. As they put up a gravestone and say that they're the parents of my children and they're no relation to me.
Hmm.
It's just unbelievable. So if I go back to New Haven, Michigan, everybody thinks that Cook and Perry and Westhouse are my children's parents. They're not. They're not even related to my children. They murdered my family members, murdered 4 of my wives, murdered Jimmy Hoffa, raped my daughter, and now they claim they're my daughter's parents on a gravestone. So that gravestone will be there 200 years from now. I'll be dead. I can't even defend who my daughter is. And it looks like Cook and Perry and Westhouse are my daughter's parents. And this is what they're doing. And they're doing this everywhere in the country to hide me. And the Pope helps them do it. The Bush family helps them do it. Cheney helps them do it. Trump helps them do it. Paul, Ron Paul help them do it. Barr helps them do it. And it's all about money. I had a lot of money the day I was born. They stole it all, divided me up, and now they won't admit who I am. Now that was Cook. And at the same time, Cook gave me a job and never a paycheck. And I was handing him $6,000 a week, and I collected the money and handed it to him in cash. Never gave me a paycheck. I could have just took my paycheck anytime I wanted. I didn't do that because I'm an honest guy. But Cook never gave me a paycheck for over a year and a half. So I couldn't hire a new attorney to file murder charges for Vicky and Terry. And that's exactly why Cook did that. And that was Smoky Mountain Ministries in Bulls Gap. I was a 50% partner who never got paid. Tom Garrett destroyed my online income at my computer company on the day my wife was murdered. CBS covered JFK's murder.
Yeah.
Barbara Walters and Walter Cronkite. Walter is my brother who stole my inheritance with my aunt. And Barbara Walters, the Walters family was my wife Victoria's advocate in the hospital where they cut her ears off and slit her throat Halloween Eve. And they called me on Walter's phone, her advocate's phone, and screamed Slatery and Slater in the phone as they cut my wife's ears off and murdered her Halloween Eve. They used the Walters phone. And Walters had asked me to burn down their properties 4 years prior to that. I told him no. He wanted to give me $10,000 every time I burned down his house or one of his college buildings. The Walters family. And I told him, no, I'm not an arsonist. And the only 2 people who knew that were Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, who lived across the street from me. And they're both dead now. They died along with my wife and my attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I told Mr. Walters because he knew, or not Mr. Walters, I told Mr. Anderson because Bobby Walters, who tried to set up these building burnings
Yes.
with his wife, that was Anderson's best friend for 30 years. So I told him, your friend is asking me to burn down his properties for money. And I left it at that. and I walked away. Then they murdered Victoria using the Walters phone, and Walters was her advocate. They cut her ears off. And Tom Garrett from CBS, on the day they murdered my wife and my attorney on his way to the DA, destroyed my only income. As Cook made me a partner at a ministry, I was handing $30,000 to a month, and he never gave me a paycheck for a year and a half. And Comcast, who the owner of Comcast just got out of prison, he was in prison, the owner of Comcast.
Okay.
He charged me 5 times for the same Comcast bill. I would 5 times in 1 month. He charged me $130 for the same bill, and claimed I never paid the bill. So Comcast, CBS, Cook, and then Perry showed up with the National Guard from Obama and took over the front page on the newspaper
Yeah.
with the Duck Dynasty.
Mhm. Yeah.
Another
Ban Perry.
Baptist church, another Baptist church. And there's Perry taking over the front page of the news after 2 of my wives are dismembered and murdered. My wives didn't even get an obituary because the Perrys were on the front page with the National Guard from Obama and Clinton.
Wow. Yeah.
As Tom
That's-
Garrett sending me Clinton's computers from the FBI offices.
Right.
Real interesting, my life, isn't it?
That's the understatement of the century.
And there's even more to this.
Oh, I know.
I know you're tired and you got to get up for work, so we'll end this full moon video here.
Okay.
And
I'm glad.
I'm not gonna delete or edit anything. I'll just leave you missing.
Okay.
And I'll send you this video, and you can put it up on YouTube. And let's see who sues me. So I got Cook, Perry, and Mills pretending they're my child, my daughter's family, and they're not. I don't exist, and they murdered 4 of my wives and over 24 kids in my lifetime. Bye, Greg. And this is directly contributable to Westhouse murdering Hoffa, kids, raping kids, and murdering my wives with bikers and state policemen. Bye.
See you later.